Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Parent Academy tonight. This Parent Academy is a makeup from our January 26th Parent Academy when we got snowed out. So thank you for being here with us. I am Martha Henson. I am the Health and Wellness Specialist for the district. And tonight's topic is the perils of vaping for all students, signs, dangers, and pathways to treatment. In a few minutes, you will notice a link in the chat for an evaluation. We ask that you would take a few minutes, maybe towards the end of the presentation, to complete this. It's very brief. It really does help us in planning our parent academies and getting feedback to continue to improve upon them. In 2 weeks from tonight, we will be hosting another Parent Academy on Youth Mental Health First Aid and ways parents can really help their children and be aware of signs for mental health decline, but also ways to really support their children during this time. This is kind of a preview to a class we offer here in the district for staff and parents called Youth Mental Health First Aid. That's a full day class that we're hoping to offer in April. So be on the lookout for that. It is certainly my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. He is becoming one of our favorites in D20, Dr. Nick Piantanida from UC Health. He is the UC Health Southern Region Medical Director, and he works a lot with integrated sports medicine and works a lot with our D20 athletic trainers as well. He has been in Colorado Springs since 2008. He's former military, so he's a friend of many of us who have are in the military community, and he certainly understands that in our community. He speaks on a variety of topics, many including dealing with sports performance and adolescent overuse, injuries, that kind of thing. But tonight he is speaking on the perils of vaping. Please welcome with me Dr. Piantanida, and we thank him for his time and in being with us tonight.
All right, good evening, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yes, I always look forward to these sessions where I can be part of an exchange of information and education, knowing that there are so many topics out there that you as parents, teachers, and I'm sure there's some students on tonight that could greatly benefit from. This is a topic that we kind of explored as a group about a year and a half ago, so clearly before our COVID pandemic, and it itself was an epidemic, as you'll see from several of the slides. I am representing UC Health tonight, and in particular the sports medicine program that has launched a Safe Play Enrichment Series, and so this talk is part of that series. Our objectives are three. The first one is to discuss the historical, statistical, and trends that surround tobacco-related challenges in our youth, and of course we're going to focus on this vaping epidemic. We'll bring to life these health perils that are associated with e-cigarettes and the medical conditions for which we need and are learning more about each and every day. And then we're going to introduce tonight some solutions that I think you in this school district, as you do in so many ways and so well, could lead as a partnership with your teenage students to bring positive change involving reducing or eliminating teenage cigarette use. and e-cigarette use in particular. Like I've done in the past, I want to kind of ground us with a perspective, and my job tonight is really to do my very best to take a complex topic and try and create some salient and simple features that we as a community can rally around and understand. And doing so, your job, as I hope you may understand it, is to learn this information to a degree where you feel comfortable and well enough to communicate it to either a peer or a parent or a friend, or in fact to your student for which this information is greatly needed. As I said, this discussion tonight is nested within our UC Health Safe Play Enrichment Series. This is a series that I facilitate in conjunction with our senior athletic trainer, Kevin Roberts, who we're greatly appreciative of his contributions, and our nurse and leader, Matt Spatansky. And so the three of us run this series, and we're hoping that, as you'll see with later offerings, that will continue to be enriching for all of you. Tonight's talk, though, falls into our third objective, and that objective is to incorporate a culture of safety and wellness to optimize performance while preventing injury. And so this whole wellness focus tonight is part of where we're trying to drive our conversation. And so tobacco, I mean, center stage, and an endearing and challenging topic that's been in healthcare in so many ways for the last century and more. It has evaded a lot of healthcare behaviors and warnings, and has remained a #1 cause for preventable death. And we see here almost 500,000 annual deaths are associated to tobacco-related causes. And then particularly tonight for our focus is our youth, ages 12 to 17. And that statistic is fairly alarming also, in that 1,600 youth each day smoke their first cigarette. We'll see later in the talk why that first cigarette and why that youth focus has particularly been a burden to us in healthcare in the course of what cigarette smoking represents as it continues into the later years. We know cigarettes are bad. It's been clearly shown to be associated with coronary ischemic heart disease, vascular disease, whether it's in the brain and causing a stroke, or peripheral vascular disease. Our blood vessels react very adversely, and the associated atherogenic or clot formation, plaque formation that it promotes is significant. Of course, it's a respiratory illness, and we're going to see tonight with our vaping epidemic in particular with some images that lung disease is well established, well known in our tobacco history. And then cancers, multiple cancers, whether it's bladder cancer, renal cancer, cancers of the skin. There's a long list of cancers that are attributed to our tobacco use. And then, of course, cigarettes are not alone. We have our smokeless tobacco. As a sports doctor myself, we see it on the playing field. And as COVID has brought some positive change, we've seen that in Major League Baseball that it has been eliminated and restricted in many ways. And so to the betterment of everybody's health and health risk, we're seeing some positive change, but smokeless tobacco is included. And then tonight we'll deep dive into the vaping perils as we've come to know them. Okay, sorry, I got to go back one slide. And so the history here with tobacco, it's deep, it's long in its roots, And so over 1,000 years, tobacco has been a product of interest and leisure in our societies. In the 1600s, our tobacco introductions came from Europe, and by the 1848, we started to see some of the mass production of tobacco in our very country. And so this history, we shouldn't forget because it, like many things, engenders its own challenges as we deal with change and why change can be so difficult around a health habit. And doctors are not excluded in the due course of where this history has arisen, where doctors at one point were part of the positive ad campaign and part of the messaging that was associated with cigarettes. And so all aspects of life were instantly implicated as part of this tobacco history. With regard to e-cigarettes, many of you may not realize, but this history finds itself in China. And so I guess, again, another association with our novel COVID-19 virus. This time it's 2003, where a Chinese pharmacist named Han Luk developed and invented e-cigarettes and marketed in association with the Dragon Holding Company. It was then 3 years later where e-cigarettes entered the European market, and then the rest of the story does follow our tobacco roots, where from Europe, the USA market by 2007 became exposed and started its introduction. By 2009, we started having e-cigarette companies lobby and plead with the FDA with regard to the limited regulations that e-cigarettes were experienced with regard to its nicotine and nicotine concentrations. Of course, those pleas were short-lived because soon after, in the 2010-2011 period, we saw large rises in adult use of e-cigarettes. And then finally, the real epidemic began in 2011, as you can see on the slide, a 900% increase in e-cigarette use. And this whole pre-COVID ramp up of e-cigarette use as rapid, I mean, it's blurring in the speed at which it occurred. In fact, has much to do about the product, has much to do about the marketing of the product, and the dollars that went into its proliferation, as we'll see. And here's some more about that dollars, and it's the title is Gold Rush. You know, as Philip Morris, you know, more recently known as Altria, it bought 35% stake in Juul in 2018 for $12.8 billion, and so not bad for a startup company. And then it further invested in the cannabis arm of this e-cigarette business for a smaller amount. But we'll see that they are hand in hand meaning that the nicotine component of e-cigarettes, and then later the cannabis THC component has a natural evolution, as we've seen in 2011 all the way through to current day. Big market for all these products, and lots of change even in the style and the delivery of these vapor-based substances. So, talking about vaping and the vaporization of the product. So, I've got several devices I actually brought tonight, but the science here is basic, and that's where you take a liquid and you store it in a small contained capsule, and you apply heat and pressure to that capsule, and with heat and pressure you can then convert that liquid into a gas. And in fact, you can see by the graph, you can also do the very same to a solid, just based on the amount of heat and pressure that you provide. As a diluent, as an additional additive to that liquid, You can put any number of substances, and nicotine being primary, and THC also being in the focus of items that are added to these solutions that are vaporized. The systems are fairly simple, but yet, as you'll see tonight, I'll try and display a couple of them, are very intricate in their designs. And so by design, you simply have some energy source or power source being primarily a battery. You have an atomizer chamber that basically translates that battery energy into some electrical current that then gets passed into the cartridge as a heating element, and that then vaporizes our product so that it can be produced in a vapor form and then inhaled as part of the e-cigarette. The e-cigarettes that I have tonight, you see pictures of them on your screen, but again, the chamber that contains the fluid, as you can see, is exchangeable. It can be filled, and in some regards, it adds a great deal to the contamination, the potential contamination, whether it's bacterial or even fungal, or other external contaminants as that chamber is being filled. You have the primary, again, power source, and interesting that power source can be recharged in a number of ways, and you can see there's possibly see there's a USB component to that where you can plug it in to a wall unit or your computer to charge, and then you have a button that you push. As you can see here, it turns green when it's activated. So a device that's been well engineered and designed for one purpose, that is to create vapor out of a solid or a liquid solution. I've got several others here, but they all follow the same theme. The Juul product actually has a cartridge that you buy, and it comes in these little chick-lick type packages where you push them out the back, and you've got, in this case, a 4-pack that comes in, a very nicely packaged product. And so for simplicity, it's been very well engineered and easy to design. Those are closed systems. You may have a pipe that you may place a solid product in, and then of course with a pipe, then you would need to see a lighter of some sort to ignite and change that solid into a vapor. And so, as parents out there, I show you these things because I think you may, as you encounter your youth, come across devices that this may be the only time that you have seen them, or maybe you've seen them many times, and you can see that they do change in shape and form. Here's another one where the actual voltage that it delivers to vaporize the product, there's a voltage dial on the bottom so that you can either slow down or speed up the energy that's passed into the solution. So that's the devices, the solutions. Just to mention, something like propylene glycol, propylethylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, vitamin E acetate. Just propylene glycol, that product was the #1 allergy irritant in 2018 nationally. And as an allergy irritant, it was recognized by our allergy specialist, dermatologists, as being the predominant dermatologic and airway irritant for that time period. And that's a common solution in these vaping pens and products. We're going to talk about vitamin E acetate in some slides further, and that's again another product that's being used as a combination, usually to provide some diluent or preservative or some kind of stabilizing component to the solution so that it has a shelf life or it has some durability prior to it being vaporized. Some systems, I think you can see the ones I tried to show you here virtually. You see now several of them pictorially represented. I think it's important for all of us to know that these vaping systems come in very different forms and fashions, and just need to be aware of that. You know, driving in and focusing on nicotine, because that was the original and main product for which these vaping systems were designed. We have many physiologic side effects of nicotine, and certainly many of them that create altered or impaired function in our youth, and those including particularly the central nervous system, symptoms of headache, dizziness, sleep disturbances, irregular dreams, irritability. You know, I would say our teenagers, they don't need any help in some of these areas. And I would say, you know, the GI side effects, you know, when you bring to bear the stressors of our education, and in many regards, even today, where we're doing it both in a hybrid form, you know, these GI issues are really part of the stress that we see in our teenagers. Of course, our cardiovascular effects of nicotine, as well as our bronchial effects. You know, given a teenager with asthma, or say, you know, a heart problem, you know, these are added concerns to their overall health and wellness that nicotine further aggravates. So the earlier slide, I talked about 1,600 new first cigarettes smoked by our teenagers, and you can see here that 1 cigarette a day for a month, our science has shown us that it's addicting to the extent of 1 in 3 kids. So over the course of a short 30 days, these kids already are identifying symptoms of tolerance. In other words, you know, varying responses to the nicotine and needing more of it or more frequently, or developing withdrawal symptoms. And you see some of these withdrawal symptoms here again. Again, many of these symptoms can be interwoven into what we see in our normal teenage personalities that can make it difficult to identify. But there you have it, 90% of smokers start as teens. And that's why our talk tonight is particularly relevant in regards to a health and wellness concern, because if we can make a difference at this age in terms of education and alternative choices, it's a big life changer overall. So here's the nicotine conversation, and it's not unlike our cigarettes days of old, where the initial e-cigarettes were reasonably low in nicotine, and as the nicotine cartridges and products went into market, they consistently increased that nicotine content, mostly to accommodate the demands of the consumer. But then again, it becomes more addictive, and then again, it becomes more challenging to withdraw and to you know, stop the nicotine habit here with the e-cigarettes. It's not unlike what Philip Morris did in the past with cigarettes and ammonia to make it you know, more bioactive and more effective in the course of its addictive properties. And for sure, this age was targeted, young adults included, because of the nature of the vaping behavior, where it was portable, where it was stylish potentially, where it was believed and initially marketed to be less harmful. You know, as a physician, I forever entertained that comment and question from my patient that you know, I stopped smoking, but I'm now vaping, and that's got to be better for me. You know, the marketing of various flavors early on, and how that was appealing, particularly to our youth. I mean, the many aspects of this vaping epidemic were purposeful in how it eventually developed into a deep-rooted concern for all of healthcare. And that didn't exclude our teenagers. And so here you see a graph, and the top solid bar represents smoking, any product, tobacco product. And then below it, you see that e-cigarettes in high school, and then the blue dotted line has e-cigarettes in middle school. And I think what you see there with that red arrow, what it's trying to show is that e-cigarettes in high school is closely following in the 2012, 2014, and then all the way to 2018. It's closely following our tobacco products, cigarette use in our high school students. And you can see those numbers rising from 3.6 million to 5.3 million. And it's just astounding, that rate of rise in 1 year. And it all, as we're going to discover and review numbers here shortly, the COVID-19 and the isolation and socialization changes of our youth made a positive impact to at least create some plateau in this rising curve. So here is the landmark study that came out in 2019, and this is a study that was originally described in JAMA. It took 10,000 high school students and almost 9,000 middle school students, and it found that well over 25% of our high school students were currently using e-cigarettes, and just over 10% of our middle school students. And so that sheer fact in terms of utilization brought great awareness and concern to this epidemic, where 1 in 3 were frequent users, 2 in 3 were only e-cigarette users, and of course, as branding was a major part of this, the Juul brand was the majority brand, and those that were flavored were by far favored. And so you can see legislation that followed did focus on some of this data that came out. It wasn't just about nicotine that we discovered use, of course, in these vaping products. And you see here with some concern our 8th graders, 10th graders, 12th graders with a rising incidence of cannabis use in conjunction with their vaping. And of course, we live here in Colorado, and we have ready availability of this product with the age restrictions that apply. It's still, as you can see, of some concern. And when you introduce it in a vaping platform, you're potentially introducing it in either uncontrolled or in high concentrations that become also particularly concerning. And so we look at THC in Colorado, and we see the graph here that takes our revenue dollars from January of 2014 well into 2019. And we see across all income revenue streams of marijuana that when you add those up in total, in 2018, the total revenue from marijuana sales approached was $255 million. And so again, a big market item, a big revenue item, for which we tonight are talking about behavioral challenges. And in any case, where there's large dollars associated with items, we in society are going to struggle with how to contain them. E-cigarette health concerns, and this is where the conversation really needs to get to our youth. As we'll get into some of the final slides, this resonates with your teenagers. This is a line of conversation that I would ask that you think through and consider my words tonight as you may be faced with a youth who has a vaping predilection, problem, whatever you call it. It's been well established that in these heating elements there are numerous metals and elements that are well described and dangerous for the human body. And think about metals that are introduced, such as lead and chromium and nickel and cobalt, and tungsten. These are deposited metals, whether they're in the lungs or in the circulatory system, eventually getting to the brain. These are metals that create significant cognitive decrement. It creates behavioral and associated changes, and let alone the respiratory system structural changes that are associated. These systems are volatile. I mean, there's a battery here and an electrical charge that's associated with this. And as such, chemical reactions that can occur, as you see with the burns to that hand on the slide, to the face, as you see on the slide. These chemicals are volatile, particularly the benzene and the toluene that are in these solutions, and they themselves have dangerous risks. And then moving to the column on the right, we talked at length here a little bit about the nicotine effects, physiologic effects. There's other products, the carbanols, our solvents. We're going to see some of the respiratory effects of vitamin E acetate, glycerol. We talked about its presence as a #1 allergen in 2018. All the flavorants that are in there have their deleterious effects. And many of these systems, as I showed you, are not closed systems, or you're able to introduce liquids into them. You're exposing those systems to bacterial endotoxins. I mentioned fungal and mold toxins. Just a bunch of contaminants that we in healthcare and our wellness focus need to be concerned about. And to drive the discussion a little more specific, tonight we're going to look at the lung-specific injuries. In recent weeks, I've also spent time investigating the cognitive and the brain-specific damaging effects of vapor, e-cigarettes, and vaping. And those are particularly concerning in our youth, whose brains are evolving, developing well into the age of 20, 25 before that frontal lobe is fully developed. And we're talking about systems like the cerebral cortex, which is part of long-term memory development, the hippocampus, which is internal. It's an internal segment of the brain, kind of a hard drive that stores short-term memory and short-term memories. And affects that storage of memory. I've recently been reading a book by Sanjay Gupta entitled "Keep Smart," and Sanjay, who's a neurosurgeon, I think does a wonderful job talking about the intricacies of the brain and how all aspects of our wellness, our sleep, our nutrition, how we manage stress, and yes, social interaction, very important for the brain development. But he also talks about the toxins that we introduce to our lives, and these e-cigarettes are subject matter one that we're obviously driving a message tonight. So the brain and the unique development of its during these adolescent years are particularly important. We talked about the chemicals and the other exposures, the metals. We might be young in our understanding these last 10 years in terms of e-cigarette and its physiologic and chemical stressors on the body. And but I think as it was with cigarette smoking, we're yet to fully understand the laundry list of cancers that these young adults and teenagers are exposing themselves to, that we're going to see problems later in life. The mood and emotional impacts of vaping, as you saw and I highlighted both in the withdrawal from nicotine as well as the direct nicotine effects, are primary proponents in aggravating these areas of emotional wellness and mood stability. And then you can throw vaping and its use in all the other risk-taking behaviors that we see in our teenagers and our young adults. And it's important to mention here that whatever we can do to mitigate that risk-taking behavior, as we do when we get in a car and put a seatbelt on, as we do before our kids head off to school, and those last words of wisdom that we offer them on their day. This is an area where you as parents can lean in and provide some targeted recommendations and advice in terms of risk-taking behaviors that may be particularly important when they get behind a wheel and are under the influence of vaping and THC, or are interacting with their peers in ways that may subject them to avoidable accident-based injury or harm. So keep that in mind. We've got a multifaceted challenge here, and risk-taking behaviors are part of that we're trying to mitigate. So let's take you through a story that, again, not too long ago. Back in August of 2019, there was two brothers from Wisconsin, specifically Kenosha, Wisconsin, and they opened an outfit in their home that combined the oils of THC with a consolidated and organized effort to market this product as part of a combined vaping system. And so cases started rising in September 2019, and these are cases associated with vaping-induced lung injury, and the abbreviation is E Valley. So E Valley jumped on the scene as a lung condition that was hospitalizing and essentially creating a lot of morbidity and illness in a young population, that the only association with the lung injury was the vaping practice. And we can see here over a short period of time, geographically, that from August to September to October, even our fine state of Colorado was showing a large number of cases, all originating from this one practice with these brothers in Illinois. And I highlight this because if you look at the hospitalizations that were reported by February of 2020, this one practice, created almost 3,000 hospitalizations and 68 deaths. And you'll see here, why that was the case in a moment. Here's what a lung would look like in a toxic inhalation syndrome related to vaping and e-cigarettes. And you can appreciate some of the whiteness or the opacities that are kind of like cotton ball, diffusely distributed across the lungs. And for sure, the initial response, and I think chronically, the lungs of our youth and young adults that are exposed to vaping have this underlying level of inflammation or pneumonitis that just gets worse and worse over time. And then if we take a CT scan, that was an X-ray, we start to appreciate the scarring and the structural changes to the lungs, where you see in this picture the white part is kind of the heart and the cardiovascular tree in the center, but around that you see lung tissue. And what do you see inside the lung tissue are these white, almost cement-like spiculations and consolidations that look even scar-like, that are basically occupying our air spaces. These are air spaces that are single cell. They're very intricate in how air and oxygen, carbon dioxide are exchanged through this wall and are exchanged through the blood system that's waiting on the other side of the wall to accommodate. And as you add inflammation, as you add swelling, as you add scarring to these very vital lung tissues, what happens? Your oxygen concentration, your ability to exchange carbon dioxide, it all becomes impaired, and now you have a crisis. And now you have a healthy adult who is in respiratory failure. And now you have someone who started a habit for which they're clearly committed physiologically, and they have a physical impairment in a vital organ that shows up and basically can affect the rest of their life. Lots of presentations with vaping. You see the pneumonitis or the hypersensitivity reaction. Again, it's kind of a cotton ball smattering of lung tissue that is inflamed, and where our immune system comes to attack and marginalize the contaminants that are coming in from the vaping device into the lungs. And those contaminants, as they enter the lungs, are creating this immune response that's overtaking the lung tissue. You can get hemorrhage. And so, as you can imagine, as those walls of the alveolar sacs, these are the functional cellular units, these alveolar sacs become compromised, scarred, strained, that the blood supply on the other side that's trying to exchange the oxygen and carbon dioxide, those sacs become open and they're prone to bleed. And now you start seeing this, what we call ground glass type appearance, where there's glass-like changes to the lung tissue you see, with the x-ray being on your left and the CT image on your right. Injury to the structural components of the lung. And so I've talked about the alveolar units, these alveolar sacs that are exchanging the oxygen and carbon dioxide, but to support those sacs, you have a tree, a bronchial tree. You have an interstitial structural system that props up and allows these sacs to be supported and stabilized as they're opening and closing. And that interstitial component of the lung is also injured. Again, you see the x-ray on the left, the CT scan in the center, and then you see a portable x-ray on the right. And almost just totally overwhelms the lungs as you get a severe injury to the interstitial parts of the lungs. Later stages, again, as this process becomes ignored, you get more fibrotic, more scarring to the lungs, and you see images like this that again are at this point irreversible damage. And here's a good example. We've got in the upper left corner that inflammatory. In this case, the inflammation is from an eosinophilic insult. So it's our eosinophils, they're reacting to foreign bodies or foreign substances. Your eosinophils are a subset of our white blood cells, where you have neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, and then you have eosinophils. And those eosinophils in this reaction are coming to the lung surface and into the lungs to help isolate and remove these lung insults. And you can see what steroids over 3 days does an amazing job to help eliminate the inflammatory process and the reactivity that sometimes these eosinophils in our own immune system creates more hardship to the lungs in their effort to clear the injury or insult. Again, more lipoid type changes. These are structural changes that happen as a result to vaping in the lung. Giant cell interstitial pneumonia, again, a different type of interstitial insult where giant cells are activated and become part of the inflammatory process and cause hardship to the lung. And then, of course, pneumonia. I talked about contaminants to the vaping unit, and of course, bacteria was one of them. So not only can you get structural inflammatory change, but sure, inhalation, as you can imagine, of a bacteria can cause problems. So we talked early on about one of the dilutants, and that one being a stabilizing agent, being vitamin E acetate. It's not much different structurally than the vitamin E that many of you may take every day as a vitamin, but this acetate component is very unique and very powerful as a stabilizing and diluting product. And it was this acetate element that was added in this Kenosha factory that led to this onslaught of E. valley lung-related problems. And so that's been identified. You probably saw that reported in the news, and for sure has been a target of attention in terms of safety with e-cigarettes. And so, again, spending a bit of time here with the lung-related portion of our talk tonight regarding e-cigarettes, it's one of the more well understood. It's also one of the more catastrophic and scary aspects of our e-cigarette use. It does, as you saw in one slide, seem to respond where it's inflammatory components to steroids. But clearly, if it's a bacteria or a fungal element, there's many other treatments that come to bear in the course of these hospitalized patients. There's a lot more for us to uncover, and there's a lot more for us to consider in also not dealing with the lung age issue, but the behavioral issues, the habit of smoking or e-cigarette use, the nicotine addiction. All that is still part of our conversation. I want to bring you forward to current day because you heard me allude to the fact that in our behaviors of our youth and young adults, this COVID-19 epidemic has changed the statistics pertaining to vaping quite significantly. And so here's a December 2020 statistical analysis that was published in Pediatrics of JAMA. And here the survey found a 2% decline in 10th and 12th graders and those that had vaped in the last 30 days. And even more significantly in those that were surveyed over the last 8% decline in the last 12 months. And so, there is a strong social component to how this rapid rise in vaping. And I kind of warn you as parents and really, school administrators, teachers, that as we reintegrate our students gratefully back into our classrooms and our campuses, there's likely to be also a re-socialization of this behavior. And so where we see it's pretty stiff and sturdy, I would have thought there would have been a bigger decline. There is a potential to socially approach this problem, and you'll see that in some of my comments here that follow. So what else is fueling this favorable trend? And for sure, our legislative agencies here federally and locally in Colorado deserve some of our praise as we've done a better job in terms of adopting new laws to limit the sale of tobacco products to our youth, and those federal laws restricting those products down to the age of 18. And then the flavor and vaping flavors also followed suit in February, just over a year ago. Yeah, so that's been favorable. And not to say that this legislation is done. We need to continue to look at where that fits and where that role is in terms of some cost adjusting in these products that are fairly inexpensive and easily afforded by many of our youth. School-based opportunities. I think this is where you and D20 continue to look at your tobacco-free policy and continue to rally around what that is in terms of adherence and ensuring that there is a appropriately phased disciplinary program where students are given the opportunity to rehabilitate, where students are given the opportunity to face their nicotine and THC habits, and do it in a supportive and well-focused manner. This talk tonight is a good step in providing that educational forum about the facts and perils of vaping, in fact, all cigarette use. I think our school nurses are appropriately empowered and resourced to address these topics one-on-one or in groups with our students, and those resources should include availability and readiness with the parental support to talk about replacement strategies for nicotine. And I did find and was really excited about number 4 here, and maybe this is one where you and D20 can lead the state in terms of how you use your teenage student body in creating an advisory panel specifically on e-cigarettes. Because remember, the statistics showed that 1 in 3 were using cigarettes or e-cigarettes, and so that still means 2 in 3 were not using these products. And could you use that 2 in 3, that other 66% of your student population? Could you use that 66% in a way that furthers and further develops the social norms that are healthier and well around some of these behaviors? And so in diving deeper into this student advisory council, here's some of the things that the research showed as being particularly helpful. Number one, for sure, our teens need to be part of the message development and refinement, because how is it that a message coming from a teen to a teen resonates more strongly with our peer groups and has a more lasting effect? Number two, any of the ad and conversations need to focus on a future tense and look to the future as a focus, particularly around some of the things I talked about tonight, the risk-taking behavior and the ill effects that follow with regard to vaping, the metals, the carcinogenic and potential cancer-forming properties, the EVALI, the lung-related inflammatory changes, and eventually structural changes. Those are all very, very important to our teenagers in realizing where and how the future is being affected in their health and behavior by this behavior. Emphasize, number three, the exposure to toxic chemicals. Again, that was brought up by the teenagers. Show the health risks and emphasize them as real. And so, this is not part of the fake news. This is part of real health news, and create those real moments. Again, as I talked about earlier, parents, as your kids exit out the door of your house, incorporate the vaping device, and it's part of the reason I actually brought these devices tonight. You've got to deal with the fact that these are very unique items that wouldn't have any other purpose in your teenager's pocket or hoodie or coat pocket. These are vaping devices, and these are dangerous and need to be addressed as such. And then use popular messaging platforms, whether it's Snapchat or TikTok, all wrapped up in a teenage council that's approaching this topic as one body and reaching out to their peers. Here's some of the images that have been developed as part of some of the research that I found in terms of these teenage councils. And you can see upper left corner, here's an image of a female holding a vaping device, with these waving lines, and the message here boldly says it's time to rethink vaping. And then there's smaller print there. Then that one below it reads, it's just harmless water vapor, right, ? Wrong. I mean, it's direct commentary, simple, straightforward, and then more information below it to provide that additional background. Again, give the real facts, but catch the attention of the teenager or young adult. Again, you see an African-American teenager with the vaping device in his hand. And then you see the videos off to the right and with some messaging. These are teenage-derived messages that would only be possible if we incorporate them in the conversation. And I think, at the high school, middle school level, you're uniquely suited to do that. So that finishes the formal part of the talk. I'm right at 6:53. Want to pause there and see what questions we've gotten in the course of the time that we've gone.
So we have one question so far. What is the best way to confront my child if I suspect they are vaping?
Yeah, that's a great question in this context of, you first of all need to know your child in terms of how he or she responds to critical conversation. You need, as I'm a parent too, understand that we as parents have a role in a critical conversation like this, but might it be also the opportunity to engage that child with some understanding about their health and where we as parents are directly invested in their health and wellness. And so as the parent, there is where this last few slides direct our conversation to focus on the adverse effects of the vaping and bring up the toxicities of the metals, bring up the unknown cancer risks, and bring up this story of Kenosha and the lung injury, the EVALI that's associated with both near-term, inflammatory change as well as long-term structural changes with the fibrosis that are hard to rectify. I hope that helps.
Right. The next question is vaping more unhealthy than cigarette smoking?
Yeah, it's a question that time will definitely show. I hope my message tonight shows that it has its own unique health challenges, and some of them do overlap, particularly the pulmonary injury with smoking. Remember, we're dealing with what I believe to be some brain and cognitive insults that we're seeing with these vaping products and the metals that are associated. So I would illustrate the fact that because these metals are involved and the early developmental aspects of our youth and their brain, that it's potentially even worse. As being worse, the learning and the schooling history of our high school students going on to college and other programs, masters, what have you, and jobs, this is not the time to be creating injury and insult to the cognitive parts of your physical life.
Next question is, do you feel that vaping can lead to more serious drug use?
Yeah, I mean, is vaping a gateway behavior to other behaviors that include meth and cocaine, heroin? We'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't realize that these other drugs are also in our community and part of this overall drug concern tonight. As addicting as nicotine and as behaviorally compromising as THC, the real truth is as these risk-taking behaviors are further propagated, it does include the use of other drugs. And to that end, I would say dealing with the vaping device in your homes and in your classrooms is one that is worth your time and effort, because as a potential gateway to other drugs, the statistics, I didn't present them tonight, there is a potential there.
Next question. As vaping has increased, has traditional smoking decreased, or has overall nicotine use increased?
Yeah, in high schools, we still see as you saw on the graph, we still see a dominant cigarette use representation. As we go on to college and look at college campuses, we see a substitution of the cigarette with the vaping device. And those statistics are bearing out more predominantly in universities and college settings. And so, again, I'm not sure if that trend will follow in the high schools. I think with the new legislation and the way it's been passed, I think we're going to continue to see a downward pressure on vaping and vaping products in the high school level. But again, our statistics are still out in terms of that overall effect as we get through this COVID pandemic.
Next question is, can you talk some about nicotine replacement therapy?
Okay, good question. So obviously with these nicotine concentrations as high as they are in these Juul products and other products, we definitely need to step down and ease the withdrawal symptoms. There are plenty of options out there. You saw the Colorado Quit Line number, and they'll help you with nicotine replacement in the right setting with the right supervision. And so they come in gum where you can chew it. Probably the most readily available form is in a patch, and there's different strengths of nicotine in each patch, and they start at 21 milligrams, goes down in different gradations from that level, being 21 being the highest, and so you can step down from 21 to 7 milligrams depending on the nicotine habit and the use. Again, we are in these products introducing nicotine as a way to diminish withdrawal symptoms. And so it needs to be monitored either by the school nurse or by the primary care provider, or some medical attendant in the course of how we're using this. It can take 12 weeks, up to 12 weeks, for some of these withdrawal symptoms to fully abate. And so clearly it's not a matter of putting on a patch and getting through the withdrawal symptoms in days. It can take several weeks with a step-down approach to the nicotine product, whether it's a patch or gum, in any form thereabout. Okay? Okay. All right. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure tonight. Let me just forward to the final slide. As I said, this is a continuation of our Safe Play Enrichment Series. Here's the dates to follow. We'll be bringing in some athletic physical therapists to talk more about some sports-related injuries and hopefully get some attention here in terms of how to keep your athlete physically ready for the season and healthy through the season. What type of physical conditioning might that represent in our athletes? All right, well, good. Thank you for your time tonight. I will pass it off.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This will be available on the website in probably 4 to 5 days. So you can access it there if you wanted to share it with a friend or another parent. You can lead them to the Parent Academy webpage within our D20 website and be able to watch it there. We will be sharing the PowerPoint that Dr. Piantanida has graciously presented to us tonight for you to refer to. Once again, we thank Dr. Piantanida for this excellent presentation, and thank you for being with us. 2 weeks, our Parent Academy is on Youth Mental Health First Day. We look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night.